So let me introduce my panel members. Let's see who we've got. So, start at the very end here. We have Tammie. Welcome, Tammie. Tammie has worked in skills and apprenticeships for over 11 years. 8 years with the Skills Funding Agency and its predecessors were where she worked with some of the UK's largest businesses to develop and account manage their apprenticeship provision and employer-provided contracts. You can see that I know all this off by heart. Tammie has recently been involved also with the development of the apprenticeship levy. So thank you, Tammie, for being here today. Next to her, we have Alison. I shouldn't really need this to introduce Alison, but I'm going to look for it, so bear with me. You can see how organised I am. I should have got my team to sit down in order, but I didn't. Alison is the head of the professional development at RBS and has a wide role with responsibility for raising standards of professionalism across the bank. Alison is also involved and is a member of the FISAB, Skills and Talent Steering Group, and the International Association of Training Advisory Board. Welcome, Alison. Next to me, this gentleman here. Welcome, Martin. Martin is a Senior Relationship Manager at the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. Martin has the lead responsibility for developing apprenticeships across several sectors, including the financial services, accountancy and insurance. To my left, we have Kathryn Marshall. Kathryn Marshall currently works as a Senior Manager for Apprenticeships at Lloyds and is responsible for the apprenticeship strategy and end-to-end delivery of over 30 different apprenticeship programmes across the UK. Next to Kathryn, we have Manuel. Is it Manuel? Okay. I think you answer to anything really, don't you? Manuel has worked in apprenticeships for over a decade in various capacities of the end-to-end process of the apprenticeship programme. He currently leads on all things apprenticeship for the Chartered Insurance Institute, including the CII Aspire Apprenticeship Programme, which we're going to hear more of later on. And then, last but no means least, is our host today, Craig. Craig Kay is the head of the customer experience training at Metro Bank and has worked for the financial sector for over 20 years, including 7 years in the Asian market, in Malaysia, I believe. As an employer provider, Metro have recruited over 100 apprenticeships in the last 2 years, and Craig has successfully led and designed the delivery of these programmes. So welcome, everyone. So this is where I move into my, well-rehearsed part, where I start to ask the panel some key questions. They'll come back with some key answers, which I hopefully will be thought-provoking and informative for you guys. So first of all, Alison, I'm going to turn to you if I may. So my question to you is, are you still facing challenges when trying to deliver apprenticeships across the UK?
Oh, no, Riona.
Where is Riona?
I think yes would definitely be the answer to that. I think 12 months on, so for those of you that were here last year, I talked quite extensively about some of the challenges in Scotland. I've only been working with apprenticeships for a couple of years, so it was fairly new to me, the apprenticeship levy, but we got up to speed with that in England really quickly. And then trying to understand how we could utilise the levy in Scotland was far more difficult. I think 12 months on, what I've understood is I didn't understand it very well before. And I thought it was really complex. I completely understand the complexity now, but it still is very, very complex. And I think there's a number of reasons why that is the case. I think the difference 12 months on is the number of people that we've engaged with. We have a forum that Riona is heavily involved in as well. So Riona leads a work stream in Scotland and I lead the other work stream, looking at how can we improve access to employers for apprenticeship programmes, and how can we change some policies to make it easier to access the funding. So a couple of things happening on that. First of all, we're looking at what's within our gift in Scotland to change, and a lot of that is around products. So we're currently looking at 30 different apprenticeship programmes in Scotland that for employers, they currently have a 40-page document or more that they need to understand to be able to access the knowledge, skills and behaviours for every programme. And with some help of a group of like-minded employers in Scotland, we're reducing that to 1 page. We're improving the internet site with the help of Skills Development Scotland. And Riona is heavily involved in supporting with some of the policy changes around how do we improve access to funding, particularly for reskilling. And I think the conclusion we came to after 12 months is we could spend a long time trying to get the same offering and the same funding in England and Scotland, or we could kind of look at what can we change and what can we do in the short term, and that's very much where our focus is. I hope next year, if I'm invited along here again, I'll be able to say that yes, we have a number of new programmes up and running and we have funding available. I think with help from Skills Development Scotland, FISAB, which is the Financial Services Advisory Board that's chaired by Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister for Scotland. We've got all the ducks in a row, I think I would say, to make significant change. And I'm really looking forward to the next few months where we'll start to see some of those being implemented.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you. Kathryn, since the apprenticeship reforms, has there been any change in early talent recruitment?
Yeah, so for a number of years we have been recruiting school leavers onto higher apprenticeship programmes, especially in the digital and technology space as well. And indeed we first had our first cohort of graduates from the degree in digital and technology solutions this year. So 8 out of the 9 were successful in getting a first class honours degree, and the 9th got a 2-1, so it was a fantastic outcome for them. And since the apprenticeship reforms, we've had the opportunity to widen that into different programmes as well, and look to replace some of the graduate programmes that we offer with higher apprenticeship schemes instead. Particularly in our commercial division, there's been great appetite in looking at recruiting school leavers in our markets areas onto the Level 6 Financial Services programme. And that's acted as a catalyst for some other departments to get involved with it as well. And the recent CMI survey showed that parents are getting more on board and understanding the benefits of higher apprenticeships versus going to university. But I do still think we have got a long way to go with that. So recently we had a number of offers for our audit programme which showed a pathway to a master's qualification. And once the students got their A-level results, we actually had a few of them drop out. They did better than they expected in their A-levels, and their parents thought it would be much better for them to go to university. But I will end with a couple of quotes from our audit cohort who did just join us on Monday this week. So one of them said, "I always knew university wasn't for me and feel so lucky to have this opportunity." And another said, which I thought was very interesting, "Apprenticeships are becoming the modern way to getting your uni education."
Very good, so true. Thank you, Kathryn. Craig, we've heard quite a bit this morning around the Cranfield partnership that Metro have. So can you tell us a bit more about the MSc in digital and retail banking and how that's progressing particularly? Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, welcome everybody to Metro Bank, and thank you very much for all of you to attend today, and we're honoured to have you all here. The MSc has gone extremely well. So we started working in partnership with Cranfield about 2 years ago to develop an MSc in digital and retail banking. It's aligned to a level 7 apprenticeship and is accredited by Chartered Banker. We've developed it with Paul Riseborough, who's our Chief Commercial Officer, was keen for us to work together to develop some of the masterclasses, and Paul and his team have delivered some of those in partnership with Cranfield. We had everything finalised and launched it towards the back end of last year with a cohort of 31, and the first cohort were all from Metro Bank colleagues. The majority are from our product team, although we do have colleagues from risk and retail banking and our commercial and our communications team as well. And the MSc focuses on sort of 3 key areas. So first of all, there's an overview and a strategic view of the banking industry overall. And then there's a more specific focus on digital banking, on retail banking, and on product management. We've had a really interesting start to the journey over the last 12 months. So they're 12 months into their
sort of 2.5 year experience. And that's been a really good relationship between ourselves and Cranfield. My colleague Alicia Holloway, who manages sort of the relationship with Cranfield, for us to work together on a regular basis to get feedback. As with any new apprenticeship, it's understanding some of the challenges that we're seeing. And we've got a cohort of colleagues from some who've had a very strong academic background and have spent a number of years in education, and others who haven't. And it's how do you sort of bring the practical and the theory to life for all of those different individuals. Of the 31 that started a year ago, 28 are still on track to complete the apprenticeship, which is fantastic, and receive their mastership. They're just about to start their work-based projects, which will take over the next year. But what's been, I think, one of the key successes for us is that when we started on this journey and we thought about the work-based projects, we expected that we would, our exec leadership team would provide a little bit of guidance and insight for those individuals to think about the things that would help us as an organisation. And actually what we've seen over the last 12 months is that they're already, some of the colleagues on the course are already applying some of the learnings that they're having. And for at least half of them, I think their work-based project is something that they had already identified as being a strategic benefit to Metro Bank and as an organisation, which is brilliant. So we're really pleased about how it's gone. We're so pleased that we've decided to launch a second cohort this year, which was always our hope and aspiration. And so in October this year, we'll be launching cohort number 2. Only 50% of the colleagues on the course will be from Metro Bank, and we've already had 3 other banks have put forward colleagues to attend it, and it's now going to be an open cohort. And it's a really exciting, been a really exciting project, and I think it's been a real sort of indicator of how using the apprenticeship standards and using what's out there and working in collaboration with some really good training providers, but applying that organisational focus on it and looking at it from a practical sense. I think the ability to, as we've talked about all of this morning, about building capability not only for new colleagues into banking, but how do you really stretch and challenge and help existing colleagues be prepared for the future. And for us, this is an example of how it can be delivered.
Craig, will the second cohort also predominantly be made up of specialist roles within banking?
I'm not sure about the 50%, but from our perspective, we're about to go through the same process again. So we expect that because it's pretty much we've had a representative from all of our banking areas have come forward. I think the noise that's been created internally from the colleagues that are on it will probably see us have a more diverse pool of experiences come forward. But we expect it again to be product management and retail and banking that will come forward.
The reason I ask is one of the challenges that we face when talking to our colleagues within the banking profession is that the roles are quite specialised now. There are data scientists, there are really specialised IT technicians and artificial intelligence and digitalisation. It's almost as though pure banking and being a banker is not the predominant requirement going forward, and therefore why would they need to become a professional banker? That's a thing of the past, is what we're almost facing. So having an element of strategic banking within the masters for me is really encouraging but interesting. Have you had any feedback from those that are going through it just to say how that's beneficial it's been to them in their role?
Yeah, we've certainly seen, I think as I alluded to earlier, we've certainly seen the verbatim feedback from not only the individuals but their line managers and heads of around the impact of not only in the broader thinking of that individual in their area, but some of the tactical and strategic things that they've identified that can improve their day-to-day and their teams and their environments that they work in. And I think for us that's the pivotal question. I think one of the colleagues earlier on in the panel talked about how do you really prepare for the future when you don't actually necessarily know what the future looks like. And I think from a thing like the MSc, which is this strategic overview and looking at retail and looking at digital and looking at product management, we're attracting colleagues to it from a diverse sort of background. We've got risk, we've got bankers, traditional bankers, we've got people in our comms team, we've got people in our loans team who have all come forward and seen the opportunity there to explore the art of the possible and almost future-proof where their careers may take them.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Manuel, may I turn to you and ask you my question that's not been predetermined at all? I mentioned to you in your introduction that at the CII there is an Aspire apprenticeship programme. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the Aspire Apprenticeship, the CII Aspire Apprenticeship Programme is developed primarily to support small to medium-sized firms that typically struggle to source relevant training providers. But what we've seen is an increasing amount of larger levy-paying firms who want a simple plug-and-play solution to their apprenticeship needs. What they benefit from a simple online registration is access to the 14 apprenticeship standards in England that have CII qualifications embedded, as well as the frameworks in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales that also have CII qualifications embedded. And all of these are delivered through 7 apprenticeship training providers that we've obviously done our due diligence on, as well as conducting an ongoing quality assurance piece to give that reassurance to the employers that have registered onto the programme. I suppose to a certain extent as well as them being able to get on with what they do and leave us to manage that whole aspect of things. Because I suppose what most employers on the panel now would agree that managing the apprenticeship levy as well as tackling all the issues that come with apprenticeship training providers can be somewhat difficult to a certain extent. So what we try to do as a chartered body is take that away from the employers and support them as best we can. And like I mentioned, there are 13 standards across the board, and it's making sure that all the standards that the employers or the training providers are working towards are aligned with us as what we do as a chartered body as well.
So you talked about taking the challenges away from the employers. What do you think their biggest challenges are?
So it's the whole end-to-end process of apprenticeship delivery. It's the sourcing of the training provider, for instance. So we already, like I said, have a bank of apprenticeship training providers that we have. There's also the recruitment element that comes with it. So a lot of smaller firms don't necessarily have, I suppose, the resource to go out there and source their own candidates, and particularly in insurance and personal finance, it can be somewhat difficult. So there's that element. There's also the onboarding piece that comes after that. There's the actual delivery. So what we do is monitor everything the training provider does, from the content of what they do, what the delivery model looks like, is it blended learning, having requirements as to having at least an Ofsted grade 2 from their last inspection, just so there's a track record of their ability to deliver quality. And it's right through to the end process. So Martin on the panel who's here attends our regular review meetings that we also have outside of the Aspire programme. So what we do is have quarterly review meetings with employers and insurance. So that's all the levy payers and all the networks that come, sit around the table and we discuss all the relevant issues that they might be facing. And then what we try to do as a chartered body is go away, have a think about that, and work with the likes of the SFA and the IFA to some of the training providers and the endpoint assessment organisations to try and make sure that this apprenticeship programme is fit for purpose, essentially.
I think from our point of view, from the Institute point of view, we've kind of learnt a lot as we've gone along as well, because when we first started working with training providers and our clients on apprenticeships, it was almost as though there was 3 different entities, and we all had got a job to do, but we actually been in that job together. And there are some of our colleagues from our training providers here today, and the one thing that I think I learnt very quickly is that we're all a partnership. And we're all there for the one purpose, and that is the benefit of the student at the end of it. And I wish my colleague Linda Houston would be here today, but she's sunning herself because Linda is absolutely passionate about making sure that we all work together for the benefit of the individuals and their development. And I think the great learning curve for us was, if we need to go out and we need to do a workshop for the students, or we need to do a presentation, we need to do it together. We're a combined force working together, and I think that's, for me, was the biggest learning curve. Let's put an end-to-end process. Let's map out what is it we need to do from that moment when somebody says, I want to be part of an apprenticeship programme, and to the moment that person gets their certificate. What's that process? Who's involved? From the Institute point of view, like everybody else, we've got this duxing where there's those of us on the front line, me and the relationship management team, working with you guys to actually get the apprenticeships going. But below us, my goodness, do we have a team that's paddling underneath very widely to make sure everything goes on. And it's important that we supported them as well, because they're equal partners in it. And our teams within our administration teams that support the banks are just amazing at what they do. But it's under the water and you can't see it. but it was important to make sure that that process was included as well. And I think hopefully everybody agrees now that it's a much better process for us. But it was a hard learning curve along the way, I have to say. Okay, I'm only 50% way through my questions, but I'll continue on. Tammie, let me turn to you at the end, bless you. This is a bit of a negative question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What evidence have you come across that apprenticeships perhaps aren't working and are a bit inflexible when it comes to reskilling particularly?
I'm not going to answer it in a negative way.
I knew you wouldn't.
And I'm not going to say that apprenticeships aren't working in the financial service sectors. I think we've already heard today that they absolutely are. So we know they're a fabulous workforce development tool, and we've heard today from the employers here, and we've heard on many occasions that they are. I think, and agreeing with Manuel, for the smaller employers in the sector, progress probably has been slower. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think not having the levy as a catalyst to drive forward is probably one of them, but also very much around training provision and that not being consistent for them and not being as open as it might be. So I definitely agree with that point. But as I say, it's not that they're not working. I think it's the fact that in a fast-paced industry like this, one where actually standards that we developed only a few years ago are already probably looking at things that were relevant in the recent past rather than looking at the future. It makes that quite a challenging process to keep those things up to date and to keep those things relevant. And I think, and I don't think necessarily trailblazers have been supported and encouraged to develop things in a future-facing way. I look back to my job as a relationship manager, doing a similar job to Martin, but way back when we were still learning, to be honest. And I certainly wasn't in front of those employers saying, well, what's going to happen in the future, Are you thinking about these standards to make them future-proof? We were just trying to get an occupation that reflected the now. And I think that's a challenge for the trailblazer process that develops these apprenticeships, is that it's not necessarily supported to be future-facing. And I think that's one of the key things that means that they're not as flexible as they might be. I think if anything, the opposite's true when they're developing standards. The guidance from the Institute for Apprenticeship has always been it needs to be very sector specific, it needs to be very occupationally specific. And I actually agree with that as a concept, because you want people that can come out of it and do the job. But when you're in an industry like financial services and you want to have things that are professional standards and consistency that go right across the industry, there needs to be that flexibility. And I think that's that rub between needing future-facing professionals and those with these, what was it we called them earlier? I've got written down, mega trends. I wrote that down, I haven't heard that one before. So, having these mega trends incorporated and blended through the apprenticeships with the policy requirement to have really occupationally specific quality apprenticeships. So I think there's a real rub there. And I think that, I don't think any of that's insurmountable, and I know some of the stuff that CII are doing, I think it can happen, but I think it has to be happening in collaboration. There has to be a strategic review of these standards. We know the review's coming, and we know it needs to be collaborative to try and lace the standards with the skills that you need to go through it. And I think that there's some smart ways of getting around this. One of the things that is probably a little bit frustrating is that it kind of feels like we're still having the conversation that we were having 12 months ago at this conference and around that. I think that's probably not surprising, because I think the review of the apprenticeships and trying to look at it as a financial services whole is seriously challenging, and it's a big undertaking. But I think it's one that needs to move forward. And from my point of view, having worked in financial services and developing the Trailblazer apprenticeships and having sort of gone through that process a few times now, it's clear that it needs to be collaborative, but it also needs to be better supportive. The employers that do this, that come together and deliver on these apprenticeships, are so dedicated to getting this work done, but they don't have the time in their day job to do this stuff. So they need to be better sorted by the professional bodies, potentially by the Alliance of Professional Bodies, by the training providers, because it is a partnership, and by other partners in there to try and move it forward, and for guys like Martin at the Institute to support some of that stuff going forward. So yeah, I think it's just about reinvigorating that Trailblazer group and that financial services collaborative and taking it forward. I'll get off my hobby horse now.
Before I move on to ask Martin, lots of questions I've got now, but I just want to get Alison's thought, and sorry this is impromptu, on the Trailblazers group, because Alison, you are part of the Trailblazer group as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess just generally on that, I do agree with Tammie's point around flexibility. I kind of take my hat off to Trailblazer Group. Now, I did recently get involved in it. I wasn't involved 2 years ago when they were pulling all the standards together. But particularly looking at the comparison with Scotland, the standards are effectively learning outcomes for a professional role. So it's the knowledge, the behaviours and the skills. Now, actually, they're fairly broad. So if I'm looking to train someone who's a banker and I'm thinking, well, digitalisation is coming around, what's that going to mean for them? What knowledge will they need in the future? Am I still going to want them to understand the regulatory framework? Absolutely. Do I still want them to understand risk and compliance and all the governance and our policies? Yes. So actually the knowledge hasn't changed. Now they'll still need the skills that are in the standard, and the standard's quite broad in terms of skills as well. But they'll probably also need to know a bit about data, because if you're going to help your customers, you're going to have to access data in a different way going forward. So I think the biggest challenge with reskilling is around how do we work with apprenticeship training providers to be able to deliver on the standard, but when the standard says do they understand system and processes, can we get an up-to-date module in there that is current and we can apply at that moment in time? And I think that's where the flexibility comes in. Yeah. And I think that's going to need apprenticeship training providers to be set up in a slightly different way to be able to do that. I think it also means that, back to that point about us all working together, my frustration is there's never one person accountable for the end-to-end process for apprenticeships, no matter which country I'm working in. It's a lot of people doing their best to kind of bring it together. I'd like to see that accountability, but that might be because we get better digitalised. So how are we collaborating together? How do we form the Trailblazer group so that rather than everyone having to come down to one location for a day at a particular time that suits everybody, why can't we just put our comments on a virtual board and then come together on a call on a regular basis and get the different experts in to put their insights into that at a time that's convenient for them? So I think we need to get better as a Trailblazer group. And I mean that in the broadest sense of all the people that are involved in apprenticeships and using the technology that's available in a better way.
I think my 9-year-old granddaughter could help you with all that technology,
Sure
and white
she could.
bulbs and having a forum online. I think she'd be really good at that. Thanks, Alison. So Martin, last but certainly no means least, Tammie touched on it a wee bit, and there is a review coming. We know there's a review coming. So my question for you is, what can we? I'm sounding like I'm in the Houses of Parliament moment because I'm really going to tie you down now. What can we expect to see in terms of the new revised standards? And more importantly, when can we expect to see them?
I will answer those questions.
Like a
I would
politician?
really like to go back to some of the points that were made earlier as well.
Please do so.
I represent the regulator for apprenticeship quality in England. And we have that statutory function to periodically review all approved for delivery apprenticeship standards. The last few years there's been nothing short of a revolution to illustrate that, if I may. 2 years ago we celebrated having 100 apprenticeship standards in England. When I looked this morning there were 490. My hair wasn't grey 2 years ago, but apart from that it's going well, I think. So it's been a very, very, very busy time, and from our perspective now, although we're getting new apprenticeship requests still coming through, that's dying off, and now our focus is increasingly on looking back at those earlier standards and making sure the quality is right. And we have all learned over the years as apprenticeships have been delivered, we've learned the lessons in practice of what works well and what doesn't work well. To answer your question specifically, so we're now at a place where we want to review all the older standards over the next 2 years. I don't have a date for you today, but we will give you 6 months notice that it's coming. And then we will look at financial services as a suite of the sectors that we put together, which is legal, finance and accountancy standards. And we'll look at those and ask ourselves, out of this group, which ones need to be reviewed? And we will do that firstly through a public consultation, and we will seek views. Previously, Department for Education has said that every standard would be reviewed every 3 years. I think what we've learned is we need to triage it a bit more than that, and to tackle the apprenticeships that need tackling first. So we will give 6 months notice for the review, consult, and then the conclusion of the review will be around the themes of what apprenticeships are missing, what need updating, do any actually need closing down. We've talked an awful lot this morning about how quickly banking is changing, and those are certainly synonymous with the inquiries I get about the standards. So yeah, that's how the review will work.
Thank you.
The challenge after that is, once we've made our conclusions, we will need the trailblazer groups to re-engage and help us to redevelop the new standards. And I do empathise that an awful lot of energy has gone into creating the standards in the first place. So we are there to help. And we've done a lot, I think, over the last 12 months to improve that offering. We've improved our published guidance. We think that groups only need to meet face-to-face 3 times to develop their proposal, the standard and the assessment plan. We are using virtual techniques for meeting. My children help me with that as well. And we've improved the online offering as well. So that now there's a lot of standardised templates that are used to create the content, rather than you coming to us and saying, is this okay? And we say, no, you need to go back and do something else to it. So we would like to think we are improving the service we're offering, because we recognise that we are all in this together.
And I would certainly endorse that. I think the work that we do with you, and Linda working close with you, is been great for both of us. I think we've built a great relationship, and it's into the benefit of our customers, most definitely. I just want to do things a little bit different, because I think I've got an opportunity here to do a little bit of this mini consultation. So I'm going to throw a question out to the audience if anybody's brave enough to answer. And my question is, what new standards would you like to see? Is anybody brave enough to perhaps give me their idea on what standards you think we need to see? What's missing? What should change? You've got the right people in the room now, so here's your chance to give your thoughts on those standards. What should change? What's missing? What would you like to see? Thank you. Sarah, could I just ask you to talk up a little bit more, because you are not mic'd.
So from Cottrell, we're typically an accountancy and tax training provider, but we do deliver banking and finance, administration management, and beyond, it feels like. What strikes me most about looking at the accountancy standards is that there's a really clear career route. There's a level 2 for, you can see the progression of an individual, and the pathways within that can be broad. I think in financial services and certainly in banking, I don't see that career path quite as clearly. It kind of branches off into investment, into insurance, into customer service, relationship management, and then at those higher levels, there's a bringing back together of one clear standard with multiple pathways. Do you think there's an opportunity to align those lower level pathways to have that clear progression route?
So you think aligning at that lower level would have the benefit to the output at the end? Okay. Anybody care to answer that one? Maybe.
I do see it as a pathway, actually. So we have, we use quite a lot of the Chartered Banker Institute qualifications, but we have a level 3 programme, which is for more junior people, that includes the Professional Banker Certificate, the Professional Banker Diploma. You're absolutely right. It then goes on to that more senior level where there's pathways that branch out. There's a little bit of that as a reality of our business, that then allows people at that point to decide, particularly at that degree level, are they in our investment business? Are they going to go into our private business? Are they going to go into kind of frontline banking? And that, from a kind of employer in banking point of view, that seems a really clear pathway for us, and I think it works quite well for our business. When it comes back together, it's really in that financial services professional, isn't it? But again, within that, you can choose the different pathways that you want to do. So I guess it works for us from that point of view. I don't think there's anything missing within that I'm aware of. I guess the difference maybe for me for the accountancy one is just the length of time, particularly for reskilling, because actually I might have some bankers on that pathway that might want to jump into the accountancy side. At the moment they can do that because it would be 3 years, for example, if they want to do the chartered accountancy. So I'd like kind of more flexible routes and maybe some different timescales when we're talking about reskilling. But yeah, it's interesting that you view it a little bit differently from your perspective.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm very brave of you to be the first and maybe the last. Does anybody else have any? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Sharon Reynolds. I'm from HSBC, and I want to carry on from where.
Could I just ask you to be a little bit louder? Yes, sorry.
Very rare for me. We work actually very closely with Sarah, and I have to say I would agree. We take on hundreds of people on the senior financial services customer advisor standard, the longest title in the world, and when they graduate with us about 18 months on, they're very keen to do another apprenticeship, but there isn't one that quite suits their job role. They're not quite at that level either to do the relationship manager level 6 or the FSP level 6, and there seems to be a little bit of a gap for them, and then unfortunately they might lose momentum when they are ready for that level 6 qualification. So it'd be nice if there was something in the middle. Is that?
Tammie, I know you're itching to answer this one.
No, it's just more a question back actually, because I think when I was looking at some of this last year around sort of where the apprenticeships sit and in the financial, and I think, you know, the kind of feedback was that there weren't that many gaps. Yes, things needed to be reworked and there were some things to do around consistency. But I totally get what you mean in terms of that sort of interim level. But when I was asking the question back to employers, I was like, well, what was the job that they do that isn't just a stretch from where they are at, say, customer advisor level to, or is it starting to specialise? And with banking, it felt like it was always ending up specialising a little bit, and there wasn't an occupation you could hang your hat off that you could then hang a standard off. And I don't know, question back, maybe there is something there that employers are aware of that is that next, but I couldn't figure it myself, that I'm not.
Yeah, we do have a lot that go on to say be a mortgage advisor, for instance, and do the level 3 or level 4 in that sort of route, but a lot of them want to stay customer facing in that universal banker role, but they're not ready to be a branch manager, so there's sort of a bit of a...
So it's enhancing that existing role and enhancing and developing those skills, but within the same portfolio of what they do.
Yeah.
You're kind of looking for a level 4 or level 5, aren't you? Okay, interesting. Anybody else on the panel want to comment on that one particularly?
I mean, certainly at Lloyds Banking Group, we actually bring them in at the level 2 into our branch network. So then they do have that opportunity to progress on to the level 3. And so they do feel like they have got that career route. And then it probably is what direction do they go in next? And
so level 2's without a professional qualification.
Without a professional qualification, yes, yeah. And so some of them will go into sort of like an assistant branch manager role, and so they will then look at the level 3 team leader. Others might look at the mortgage advisor, and so it does feel like there is that progression depending on what direction they want to go in their career. But I think because we bring them in at that level 2, we've then got that obvious step to the level 3 as well.
I do have a question as well. Abby from Cottrell.
Abby, could you just speak up a little bit? I am sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm Abby from Cottrell, and I'm one of the banking tutors. And actually coming from a traditional bank, Lloyds.
Which you've done very recently, haven't you?
Yeah. And now teaching our students, what I do see is a real rise in the fintech financial service provider. So I was just wondering as whether there is actually a standard out there that's aimed at fintech bankers.
Anybody on my panel to my right here be able to answer that one?
This is another one of those things, isn't it, that we were touching on earlier, that when I was talking to financial services employees about all this stuff, it's what do we need to have in the existing standards, or what are the new standards that you need? And something like fintech or green finance, those kind of emerging trends, actually, is that an actual occupation, or is it something that all bankers need to know as their core technical skills? So you talked earlier about you're always going to need to know about compliance, you always need to know about the financial conduct, whatever it is. I don't know, is it a distinct, I don't know, it's more for the sector to ask, or is that something that is woven throughout all the occupations? I don't know.
Again, it changes so frequently. That's the challenge, that we teach somebody one particular mechanism in an apprenticeship, it's going to change in 6 months' time. So that's where I think modular is the way to go in terms of that. And actually, is it a technology role? In which case it's a technology apprenticeship you're looking for. It just happens to be in banking, rather than it's a banker role who needs an element of digital expertise within their apprenticeship. And I think that's a distinction that we need to make.
Actually, I think you were just going to add a comment.
Just that we can help by making sure that the knowledge, skills and behaviours in any given standard are written in a concise and sufficiently high level way that they can be interpreted differently over time and still represent occupational competency as that competency moves.
Okay. And certainly with us, so we work with a number of different training providers who specialise in different areas, and we had them all together yesterday and had a particular session looking at behaviours and how we can collaborate together. So for example, we've got our digital and technology specialist training provider. What can they add to somebody who's perhaps doing a more financial apprenticeship programme, and vice versa? So I think it's trying to get that collaborative working across, so you are sharing the knowledge, skills and behaviours, but within the confines of the standards that you have.
Thank you. Sorry, you.
Hi, I'm Kerry from Hong Kong.
And Kerry, I'm going to ask you to really speak up loud.
Yes, from the Hong Kong Institute of Bankers. So in response to your question about new standard, I have a view about cybersecurity. Because I think talking about fintech, as you said, what is, all the bankers have to know all the fintech skills. But for me, I mean, in Hong Kong, we think that cybersecurity should be the core skills that, cut across all jobs. And meaning that it's not just the technical department or the front line, it should be including the HR and administration, as long as you are working in the bank. And that should be a core competencies for everybody. So my point is, could we make it as a standard, to and insert it into different career paths, and make sure every practitioners are well prepared to embrace the new trends and the mega trends and the digital the launch of the digital banking. That's the view that we launched.
Yep, I get what I think. Perhaps I'm going to try and answer this one myself, because I'm going to put two hats on here, and one is going back on my many years experience of working at Santander, and my later years at working Santander was looking after regulatory training, but also I'll put my institute hat on as well. And you're absolutely right, things like data protection, cybercrime should be absolute paramount in training for everybody within particularly the financial services industry. What happens in the UK at the moment, which you may or may not know, so forgive me, Kerry, is that things like cybercrime training is what's called compulsory training. So everybody who goes into a bank or an insurance industry or any financial organisation will have to do some form of cybercrime training as an actual minimum, and then that is in most organisations refreshed on an annual basis, so that you're getting the most up-to-date knowledge. I don't know where that would sit into a standard, because it's almost as though it's I do not like the word mandatory, and I don't know where Gavin is, but I'm avoiding his eyes. It's almost as though you've just got to do it. It's compulsory. It's the minimum for anybody working in this industry. I don't personally know where that would sit in a standard, if I'm honest.
We did actually have it as a profession. So we do have a cybersecurity route that you can take. So when you're doing the digital and technology solutions standard, there is a cybersecurity pathway within that. But that's for people who their day job is cybersecurity. I think what you're saying is almost that modular piece that says, and as part of green finance and regulation and everything else, you also need to know about cybersecurity. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. Can I just add that Jenny Pelling also from Cottrell. But I think that kind of area can be marvelled throughout any standard because they are, as Martin said, drafted sufficiently broadly that by virtue of a good conversation between the employer and the training provider, you can ensure that you're looking at data, cybersecurity, cybercrime, the systems and processes and the regulatory framework. So I think by virtue of a good conversation, that can be embedded into the programme successfully.
Thank you.
The point I'm trying to say is that whether the training department or the senior management assign a training budget for this part to cover all staff rather than just the technical staff.
And I love that point actually, because one thing that I don't think we've really looked into is a standard at the moment is a minimum of 12 months. Now actually for reskilling, you don't need to reskill an existing member of staff over a 12-month period. So actually why wouldn't you be able to use funding to upskill, reskill, whatever you want to call it, but over say a 3-month period or whatever the shortened period would be. But again, I think the reskilling, we're using apprenticeships as they always have been for youngsters to reskill people. I think we need to look at how do we broaden that out, and actually is a minimum 12-month programme the right way to be upskilling existing staff and organisations?
Yeah, and I think also for existing colleagues you have to navigate your way around the prior learning and experience and how you take that into consideration when you're then mapping out the learner journey and the cost of the programme.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of bring this session to an end, particularly on because we've built on that one question. We're coming to the end of our session, but I want to give everybody in the audience the opportunity to ask any question of anybody on the panel based on things you've heard today. So good old traditional way. If you've got a question, please raise your hand and we'll get that answered. Riona, now you are going to have to talk up.
Yes, hello.
I was really interested in what you were talking about the master. One of the things that we have sent back to SDS is in Scotland you can do 8 or 9 graduate apprenticeships, 4-year programmes, part-time. And when you consider in Scotland we've got 166,000 people in financial services, only 278 took up that option to do the graduate apprenticeship. But feedback from colleagues as well as employers is why can't we do something like a master's programme, because you can do a master's in Scotland part-time 2 years, for example, for HRM, so why can't we do that? What was the challenges you faced in coming up with that programme?
From an attraction perspective or just from a development perspective? I think we're in a unique position as a bank in the fact that we are still young, we're only 10 years old, and therefore we have had a culture over the last 10 years of developing colleagues and heavily investing in that development. So I think for us, when we promote, I'm saying that traditionally across the bank we have very little pushback, but actually in our IT teams we do have a lot of pushback when you put the word apprentice next to anything. We have to call it something entirely different. But I think for this particular thing, when we're looking at a master's qualification, we used it as part of our Revolution updates, where our quarterly updates that exec leadership team put out. And actually what we found was that the respondents of people who wanted to apply was way beyond our expectations, because of the fact that the structure of apprenticeships with the 20% off the job training and the opportunity that we would provide for colleagues to be able to access that, I think was appealing enough for those that wanted further education but felt that trying to do that outside of their work in their own time would be too much of a stretch. So we actually found from an attraction perspective it wasn't so much of a challenge. I think from a development perspective, and I won't take any credit for developing it because I literally had no involvement in it whatsoever, but I know from the individuals that were, I think it's back to the challenges that we talked about today, which is how do we make it relevant to what we need as a bank, how do we make it relevant to today, working really closely with Cranfield to look at how do we deliver this masters but also future-proof it for tomorrow, and make it accessible to other banks, because this is not just something that Metrobank wanted to launch. And I think I think it comes back to that relationship with the training provider. We had to spend, some quality time in exploring what that opportunity was against the standard. But from an attraction perspective, we found it less of a challenge. With our IT team, it's an entirely different conversation altogether. But in that one, it wasn't.
Gentleman here.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Back to you. Are the apprentices, are they on full-time study? And pace? And what is your experience after, in our duration after training? Such people like that may actually jump ship. So what is
so they're all
and what do you do to ensure you retain them after training them?
We just don't give them a key to get out of the door. All of our colleagues on the Masters are existing colleagues. They've all been enrolled for at least 6 months, and they're all they've all had at least one either interim or annual review, which means that we know that they're performing in their role and that they're capable of doing the role that they're currently in. In terms of how we support their study, it's an apprenticeship, so 20% of their time is off-the-job training. So whether that's attending workshops or working on their projects, but they work closely with their line managers to ensure that they get time in work where they are allowed to study and not do their role. In terms of retention and how we keep them, no one's graduated yet, so come and see me in sort of 16, 17 months' time and I'll tell you. But I think it's like any apprenticeship. I think you either take the approach of what's the risk of investing in development because people might leave. Well, actually, they might not. So what's the risk of not developing individuals at all? So, we've always taken the approach. All of our frontline colleagues get either professional banker they all get professional banker and professional diplomas. We know that some colleagues will leave us once they've got that qualification, but we feel it's an investment worth having. We want to be an organisation where people know that working here means that they have an opportunity to develop. We look for the right colleagues when we recruit, but we also look for the right colleagues before we put them on a programme so that they fully understand their commitments that they're going to have to give. They understand the challenges that they have. And, if people leave at the end of it, then we take the hit and review it and understand why. But I think it's a risk worth taking.
I've got time for 2 more questions. So I apologise to those that I'm not going to go to. But hopefully you'll get a chance when we close and we go and have some refreshments. So I'm going to go to the lady there first of all, and then the gentleman there. Yes.
So I'm Kathryn Marshall.
I need you to speak a little louder. I do apologise.
Right. So I'm Kathryn Marshall. I'm from Cranfield School of Management, and I'm actually the director of the program. And I was from the beginning very closely engaged with Metrobank, and also with the Chartered Banker Institute. So I can speak a little bit in terms of how the program was developed. So I knew that there was a standard that was in development that I came across, which is the senior banking professional in investment and commercial banking. And then it just happened that I got in touch with some people from Metrobank, including Paul Weisberg, who has been a tremendous sponsor of this program. And we started working together in developing a program that actually could be relevant to the needs of Metrobank and more widely to the banking industry. Because one point that we always had in mind from the start is that we wanted to develop a program, and Paul as well, that would not be just about Metrobank, but it would be an opportunity to provide a forum for different individuals from the banking industry to come and engage in that program.
Thank you.
So
I really apologise. Can I stop you in mid-flow, because we are running out of time, and everybody now knows who you are, so I'm sure they can talk to you at the end. But I just want to make them one more question in, because we need to get closed down. So the gentleman there that has had his hand up several times.
This one?
Yes.
Hello, yeah. My question's on the topic of relevancy, actually. We touched on it
Can you just talk a little bit louder? Thank you.
Yeah, so on the topic of relevancy, because we've touched on it a few times, my question is regarding how fast things change now. I think 20 years ago, 40% of job titles didn't even exist, that do now. and the time it takes to develop an appropriate curriculum and an effective curriculum to prepare for the job market now, and then also having to go through the process of quality assurance, which is obviously imperative. How can apprenticeships be ahead of the curve for what's coming next? Can we ever be, or is it always going to sort of be reactive?
It's a challenge. It is. Anybody open for the challenge of this question?
I think it depends what you focus in on. So nobody knows what the future is going to look like. You're absolutely right. It's moving really quickly. There's an independent think tank that believes that 6% of roles will disappear, but 94% are going to be there, but probably half of them are going to be disrupted by technology. But that does mean that the professions are still the same. And I think that's the thing about apprenticeship programmes, they are for professional roles. So if the professions are going to be the same, the knowledge is the same. I think the key thing for me is about how do you identify those things that are moving quickly, and then how do you allow them to change quickly? And I think for me that's about making sure the apprenticeship standard is broad enough to allow apprenticeship training providers and employers to implement that within the broad nature of the standards. You were going to come in as well.
And my final comment comes from Martin, which I think is quite apt.
I agree with Alison.
Thank you.
just to let everyone know, however, that when, with all best attempts to keep the standards broad, does ultimately fail, you don't have to wait for our statutory review. Trailblazer groups can come to me any time and say, there's just this part of the standard we'd like to change. And yes, you have to go through the quality assurance process again, but we will help you to make those changes as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Martin. It remains for me to say thank you to my panel. I've really enjoyed the session, and thank you to you guys for making it such an interactive session. Thank you very much.